right, everyone, welcome back. We're starting the deep clean on this extensive damage here. We'll sand these rust spots down before we lay the first coat of primer.
Thanks. This Lightning McQueen is in rough shape. We've got major damage here on the fender and this deep scrape along the door. We've got our work cut out for us with this McQueen. The gouge on the door panel is deep and the rear bumper mounts are completely shot. So the main issue here is this crushed fender. The metal is torn, and as I clear the dirt, you can see the rust has really penetrated deep into the structure. The corrosion here is extensive. This rear bumper mount is completely compromised, and we're looking at significant structural weakness. The collision drove the front end back. Notice the asymmetry here on the left. That misalignment is binding the hinges, which are... So the first step here is a full exterior wash. We need to get all this grime off before we can start the serious metal repair. Rinsing the car like this really helps reveal the true damage underneath the grime, especially these deep scores along the side panel. So we're working on the hood of this adult-sized Lightning McQueen. The oxidation here is really thick. We're using a stiff brush to break through this. We're tackling this deep gouge on the door panel now. Using the wire brush really helps lift this heavy oxidation and expose the bare metal underneath.
As you can see, the rear bumper took a significant hit. We've got major structural damage right here at the mounts and the quarter panel. First thing, we've got to get all this water out of the seams. Compressed air works best for this. We're starting with the windshield, getting this layer of grime off so we can really see what we're dealing with inside. All right, focusing on the left front dent. The metal is heavily stretched and torn right here. This requires careful shrinking before we can even think about filler. So I'm just identifying the deep corrosion here with the chalk. This whole fender section will need to be reformed before we apply any primer. This bolt is completely seized by the corrosion. We apply steady pressure, wait for the rust to break free. Hear that crisp sound? That's the sound of the thick oxidation breaking away. We need to clear all this out before we can even think about patching this fender. When lifting a car this damaged, it's crucial to find the secure lifting points. We're placing the jack right on the space frame chassis here. Okay, the next phase is critical. We're moving on to structural repairs, starting with this bent chassis and the collapsed rear bumper. To properly assess the suspension damage from the crash, we first have to remove the wheel. As you can see, the impact slightly bent the lower control arm right here. All right, so the first step here is getting this rust off the caliper. As you can see, this piston is completely seized up. We're gonna need to replace the whole assembly. The key here is patience. We let the oil penetrate deep into the threads of these rusty bolts. Give it about 10 minutes before applying any torque. The key is gentle, rhythmic tapping with the dolly underneath. We're slowly persuading this stretched area back to its original contour. To prep this metal, we have to remove every bit of this orange rust. The wire wheel cleans it right down to the steel before we move on to the bodywork. So the key here is feathering the edge. You want to move the sander smoothly across the metal, especially around this crushed area. So the next step is degreasing. We use this solvent to wipe down the bare metal, ensuring the surface is perfectly clean before we apply any filler. The key is the ratio. You're looking for about a 2% mix with the hardener. Keep folding it until you see that consistent pink color. The key here is applying smooth, even strokes across the damaged area to fill the low spots. If you're using the orbital sander to smooth out the body filler, you want a nice, even pressure to get these contours just right. We're using the air tool now to clear the fine particulates. This lets us inspect the bare metal work on the crushed dent before we move to the next stage. So right here, we're just applying the masking tape. We want a really sharp line before the primer goes on, so precision is key. We're laying down a nice even coat of high build primer here. You want to overlap your passes by about 50% to ensure full coverage over the bare metal. We've finished the structural repairs and the initial high build spot priming. The surface is stable now. We'll be scuffing this down, and we're using 400 grit to smooth out this two-part primer. The goal here is a perfectly flat surface for the paint to adhere to. Before we lay down the color, we use this tack cloth. It's sticky, designed to pick up every last speck of dust from the primer. You want to wipe. All right, we're masking the body now. It's essential to protect these primed panels, especially the damaged fender, before we move on to the paint application. This coat of primer usually takes about an hour to flash dry before we can apply the next layer. We're just checking the edges now. The key is getting the viscosity right. We're matching the original factory racing red, ensuring the metallic flake is even.
The key is to apply the first coat very lightly, gradually building up that vibrant red over the primer. We're using the factory racing red here. When you move the gun, keep it parallel to the panel to ensure an even overlap like this. So we move the gun steadily across the panel, keeping the distance consistent to avoid any tiger stripes in this final stage.